Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Gaining Insights and AI Solutions to Face the Unknown. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items around today's event. First, you will notice a Q&A box to the left of the slide area. This is where you can type your questions at any point during the presentation. Questions will be answered during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. You will notice to the left of the slide area is a resource section where we have a link to today's deck and other resources relevant to today's event. Please feel free to download a copy for yourself or others who might not have been able to attend today. At the end of the webinar, you will see a survey box come up with a request for completion. This survey will only take a few minutes, and your feedback is greatly appreciated as it will help us continue to bring you great content for future webinars. With that, I'd like to hand it over to our first speaker for today. Hanna, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, that sounds great. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's discussion around gaining insights as well as solutions to help face our unknowns. The goal of today's conversation is to hopefully get us all thinking a little bit differently around a really big buzzword right now, artificial intelligence, and really diving into how organizations, just like yourselves, are using artificial intelligence and technology to have bigger efficiency and effectiveness gains in the workplace. My name is Hanna Hood, and I'm a Senior Solutions Consultant. And our Head of Market Strategy, Chris Juneau, did unfortunately have an unexpected medical emergency. Just want to say all is well. But in his place, we do have the pleasure to sit down with SAP Concur's own VP of Strategy and Operations, Brian Vance. Hey, Brian, how's it going?
Good, thanks. Thanks for being here. I'm not Chris. Thanks for having me.
Always. Well, we appreciate your insight. Brian, do you mind taking a moment to give the audience a little bit more background on yourself?
Sure. So I think the audience is probably a good number of finance people on the call. So I have a commonality with a lot of you. I spent most of my career in finance, actually the last 15 or 16 in SAP in the finance organization. Leading two of our businesses, SuccessFactors. I led the finance organization there for a period, and then I helped to lead the finance organization at Concur. Was lastly the CFO before about a year ago came into this position to work with Chris, for Chris, in more of the strategy side of the house. So most of my background's in finance. I know a lot on the call are in finance, so like I said, I have a commonality with a lot of people here, but so that's basically me.
Indeed. Well, thank you, Brian, for that background. So we have a lot we're going to dive into today, but maybe just to level set with everyone, what do you think is unique about this moment in time for organizations and kind of for all of us? And what do you think is driving some of the common business challenges we're all faced with right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the commonality I see is, probably 10, maybe a bit more years ago when technology was, pivoting towards cloud solutions. Cloud was the buzzword and still is, I guess, to a certain degree. And there was a lot of unknowns around that. And it was, at the time, it felt like moving very quickly. So though in hindsight, maybe not as quickly as things are moving today. But there was unknowns on how that would evolve technology. How would we take advantage of cloud-based technology? How would that change how we operate as businesses? And I think there's some common threads there when we think about how AI is influencing us today and how it will influence our businesses going forward, though it's moving a lot quicker. Like I said, I think that, ChatGPT was maybe in the common vernacular that, 2 years ago, it wasn't in our vocabulary. And now that's coming of age and certainly moving very quickly. We think of large language models, that's moving very quickly. How do we interpret and incorporate AI into our businesses? Those are something that business leaders are thinking about very much so. And even from a regulatory standpoint, like government's talking about how do we manage it, because it's a technological complete shift in the paradigm in terms of how we potentially operate as a society, not to be too broad in terms of how we think that could impact things, but certainly has the potential. So I think it right now is just understanding things are moving quickly, trying to interpret it, trying to see how we can have it be to our advantage to some degree. And just being mindful of what is evolving, because I think that the common thread also is that with the cloud technology is that, we're still on the nascent stage of it. Where we are a year from now is probably going to be a lot different than where we are today. And I think just being adaptive and aware of how technology is shifting is really the important thing right now. I think in the end, it can be very positive for everyone. It's just a question of how we manage it and implement it and take advantage of it.
Right. What questions are we asking and how are we getting more information? So when you talk about the landscape of artificial intelligence, right, everyone is getting more information. We're intrigued, we're excited, we're also a little bit hesitant, right? How would you, Brian, define AI and AI solutions specifically with SAP Concur?
Yeah, so I think when you read about in the papers, you hear about in the press, I think that people think, certainly not in this call, but I think maybe broadly in societal terms, they think of AI as what you see in Hollywood, right? And it's not that by any stretch of the imagination, at least not yet. But I think what we're talking about is that AI or generative AI is really looking at inconsistencies or maybe consistencies in data is where the foundational principle is, and how we can interpret patterns in data. And I think that's really the foundational principle of how I would interpret AI right now in, again, very nascent stage in terms of generative AI. But when we think about AI in the context of Concur, that's something that we've been doing for, AI generally speaking is something that's been around for 10 years-ish, let's say. And we've been utilizing it in our solutions for some time as well. When you think about our audit technology, for instance, that, how do we elevate certain things that are out of compliance? How do we make sure that, the expense reports that are hitting your desks are actually, they're subject to reimbursement, that they're following your policies and procedure? Those are things that we've been doing for some time. It's obviously going to evolve over the next couple of years. But we've already adopted some level of AI into our technology. It just will begin to continue to expand as we think about into the future. So that's a little bit about where we are, what we're doing, and how I would define AI. Again, it's looking at data, it's interpreting data, it's trying to elevate patterns, I'd say, is how I would define it personally.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's a really good point you make about, right, first and foremost, we have to have the information. And like to your point, AI has been learning for a very long time, and specifically with SAP Concur, I think we're all trying to move towards, right, efficiency gains, productivity gains, and spending less time in perhaps, right, mundane tasks, and moving towards perhaps maybe exception reporting instead of looking through every single line item. Can you expand a little bit on your opinion on SAP Concur's vision on, right, moving forward to exception reporting?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think that the way we see that, and it's not just specifically Concur. Let's just speak broadly in terms of the T&E universe. That there's been a bit of let's say, a balancing act when we think about how do we have a compliant T&E policy, a compliant T&E solution with a balance with the user experience. And I think that things are evolving right now, obviously. And I think that where we can add value is that there's an opportunity to bring that compliance to the front of the line when we're talking about AI and specifically our T&E solutions. But when you think about efficiencies from an organizational perspective, and again, a lot of finance people on the call, so let's talk about that a little bit. Outside of the T&E scope, there's also looking at, how do we shorten up our close? How do we manage our cash collections? Coming back to T&E, how do we make sure that there's that connectivity between my T&E solution and interpreting that data, making sure there's compliance as a connection to my ERP system? We can manage all that through generative AI in the future. It's just in terms of interpreting the data, bring the data to the forefront, and having it in a logical way. So there's definitely within our solution base, like Hanna, you had highlighted that we have this audit technology, which we've been learning for some time. And I think that we'll continue to do that. We'll continue to bring more exception reporting, to your words, to the forefront. I mean, right now, the way a T&E process works is it's just a very linear process, right? You book a trip, then you go on a trip, you compile receipts, you upload it to an expense report, you try to file an expense report. It probably comes back with some audit flags. You have to resolve those audit flags. The way it will evolve into the future is that it will be more of generative AI looking for those patterns in the trip, and the expense report effectively goes away, and it becomes more finding the exceptions. It becomes an exception report, to use your words, Hanna. It becomes more of an exception reporting as opposed to an expense reporting, and I think that will create a more efficient process. It will create a better user experience as well. So that's effectively where the entire industry is moving right now, outside of not just Concur, but the entire industry.
So you mentioned users in this equation, right? We're not only helping finance teams, we're not only having bigger efficiency gains through auditing and compliance.
Yep.
What do you think would be the bigger impact, or what can be gained from a user experience from what AI is even teaching us?
Yeah, so the user experience could be really amazing. If you think about it. So since AI is, again, to bring that point up again, that it's looking for patterns in data. Let's think about it from a trip. Okay, so you're a salesperson and you travel all the time to pick a country or pick a city, and you always fly in a certain airline. You always fly at a certain time. You'd like to stay in a certain hotel. You have certain meal preferences. Generative AI could potentially bring that and have it be more curated for a user. So the user experience in terms of the booking process could be much more personalized. Think about it in terms of the expense reimbursement process, which we talked about this before, that it becomes much quicker or much more automated. There becomes not necessarily an expense reimbursement process, which any of us who have traveled recently, we know that getting an expense reimbursed can be a headache sometimes, let's be honest. And it's not the solution, it's not Concur necessarily, it's just the policies that we need to have in place to make sure we have compliance. It creates that slowdown. Generative AI has the capability to reduce that friction and create a more seamless user experience and allow for a quicker process, a quicker reimbursement, a more user-friendly trip, not just a T&E experience.
I think that's a great point you make about the dance of, okay, how do I ensure controls and compliance remains first and foremost, right? We're going through our checks and balances while the dance of keeping our employees happy, right, at the end of the day, so they're not spending endless amounts of time doing these tasks like booking a trip or creating an expense report. So I want to ask you a question to kind of turn the coin over on the other side. And I think something that's really relevant in my own conversations, and I'm sure yours with clients, of there's so many vendors out there. Like you mentioned, AI is a hot topic. It's in our personal life. It's on our phones. It's on the TV, ChatGPT. It's quite literally everywhere. What are the risks that we need to consider when trying to vet out all of these vendors who are rising to the top with, right, feature functionality seems very similar between vendors? What are those risks we need to consider?
Yeah, and I think those probably won't be earth-shattering to the IT people on the call, but I think that the biggest risk is always going to be security. And we went through this, to go back to what we were talking about before in terms of when we were first moving into public cloud environments and GDPR rules coming out and so forth across the globe. And it all came down to data security, right? So it's about, how is my data being used, who's using it, and where is it being used? And there are probably other questions you can come up as well, but those are kind of the key things that come to mind in terms of data security and having the right to control how that data is managed through all those processes. That's the biggest risk. And the good news, before I expand on that, the good news when we think about Concur is that the data integrity, security of our customers' data is always first and foremost. That's the first thing we consider. So the risk is, like I said, data security with other vendors. Good thing SAP, we have a foundational landscape in terms of data security. That's the first thing we worry about, that we consider. The other thing that is a risk as we move into these LLMs, these large language models, is that there's enough data. there's enough data in there. So you have the security of the data, you have a contained data set, but is there enough of it that your generative AI models could actually learn from it? Now, again, in the Concur environment, thankfully for you as customers, or us in general in Concur, we have enough data, obviously, but is there enough data in the data set to learn so we can start to draw those patterns? Like we said, generative AI effectively is just looking for patterns in data and elevating that to make critical decisions. Is there enough data in that environment to do that? That's another concern. So, and the other thing is that we have the right data is escalated too. So we have enough data, we have secure data, and is the right data being brought forward? Those would be the things that I would say are the risks associated with it. But first and foremost, obviously, is table stakes, is the security around it. So whatever you're thinking about, how am I going to implement or take advantage of generative AI, is the first question needs to be asked, is how is my data used? Who's it being used for? Who's it being used by? And where is it being used? And again, SAP, we have that as our first consideration.
That's a really interesting point, I think, to your point of how is it being used? Is it being stored reliably and responsibly, right, with SAP Concur? But yeah, in general, with any solution out there, the question of how long has this technology been learning, right? How do we find out that information? How do we fully vet that when all we're being given is, right, like feature functionality of what it can do? I think that is such a crucial point of what is the evolution going up to that point actually look like? And I think that is such a crucial point of, okay, when I turn this solution on, is it going to do what I expected it to do? Is it going to right, act and perform as expected with little human intervention?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you hear a lot of it too, that in terms of ChatGPT and generative AI, that pulling in suspect information. I think that maybe that might be a little overblown, but over time, I think that the generative AI models will learn. Again, it's the right data at the right time to the right people in a secured environment. I think that as you work through that, it will be more likely that those issues are vetted out. Yep.
No, that's a great point. I want to ask you a question that, right, coming from a role in finance, that I've felt, and I've been asked even specifically this year from my own clients, of AI is out there. It's really hot topic right now, and I'm excited about it, but I'm hesitant, right? I'm a little bit uncomfortable about bringing this into my organization, because is this going to become like the new self-checkout? Is this going to take over my job? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so when we, specifically in the finance front, again, that's where I spent most of my career. I think about how we at SAP have evolved from a finance organization over the last, 15-ish years. And I'm sure people on the call can appreciate that finance never was a function that could add headcount at a 20% plus clip on an annualized basis, even though the business was increasing in terms of revenue and complexity at that rate. So we're always trying to find ways, to infuse efficiencies in the organization. And that meant trying to scale the business, but we're doing it through people. There's two ways that you can really gain those efficiencies: is either people in terms of offshoring, or it's technology. And the technology wasn't necessarily there, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago to manage through some of the complexity that was coming into our business. So like a lot of multinational organizations, we went through an offshoring activity. Not that we were moving jobs offshore, just incremental jobs were being positioned in offshore locations to make sure that we could scale the organization. And I think intuitively, most people on the call realize that there becomes a tipping point, right, where you can't really gain that much more efficiencies by going through that, and the technology needs to come into play. And I think that's where we're at now. And it's never been the idea of saying we're going to take this role and replace it with this technology. It's more that the human aspect of it is becoming more complicated. And there's being a lot more, again, finances, from my experience, has not been a role that's been heavily invested in from a people perspective, where you're expected to do more effectively with less. And how do you continue to be an effective business partner? If you're a CFO, how do you sit with your COO and your CEO and make strategic decisions if you're constantly being bogged down in some of the mundane? And it's the same thing with the people below you, the VPs, the directors, the managers, and the individual contributors. If they're being bogged down in the the mundane, there's less opportunity to bubble up kind of those ideas. And I mean, let's be honest, a lot of the best ideas come from the individual contributors in the organization. If they're having to spend all their time keying in transactions for a month-end close, or they're keying in transactions from a T&E solution, that's less time they can spend with critical thinking. So I think it's an opportunity. It's not, I don't think it's a case of AI will replace finance jobs. I think it will be AI is taking some of the burden away from finance jobs and allowing you actually to do the tasks that you want to do, why you went to school to become a finance professional, why you're a CPA or you're a certified financial analyst, or just generally a CFO. The things you want to do are to be that strategic business partner. And to the extent AI can look for those patterns in data and manage that day-to-day transactional aspect, allows you to be that more value-added position. I think that's the exciting part to me. It's a lot more meaningful. And to the extent that finance can adopt that mindset, that lens, and adopt that technology, you'll actually become more of a critical component, not that you aren't now, but you become even more of a critical component of the organization in terms of those strategic conversations. And that's exciting. I think that's a really cool future for finance.
Right. I think it's a great point you make, and I'm glad you brought it up about innovation and how much time are we really allotting these key contributors in finance and IT to be a thought leader, to really set out those stepping stones of what the journey looks like for the broader organization. Because I feel like we are often, right, a little bit bogged down. I feel like we can all say that today. We're bogged down with manual tasks, and we're trying to just keep up, right, with industry. And so I love that you bring that point up of how much time are we truly allotting to building out those stepping stones with our leadership, with our executives, to make sure we're meeting them as well as staying competitive in our industry.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it too, from an employee development standpoint, right? So to the extent you're enabling your employees to move away from that more transactional aspect of their job and to more thought leadership, Hanna, to use your words, and to more strategic thinking, I think they're going to find their jobs a lot more rewarding, and you're more likely to have employee retention as a result of that. So I think there's an efficiency aspect, but I mean, let's be honest, you want to hold on to your best and brightest in your organization, and adopting AI technology has a way to do that. I think if you have a more fulfilling job and you have an opportunity for growth, you see yourself sitting at those tables with the executives on the team, you're offering up strategic insight and how you can grow the business. That's going to be a lot more valuable for an employee than, coding, transactions at the end of the month, coding journal entries at the end of the month for the month-end close. If AI could take care of that for you.
Exactly. No, I completely agree. So speaking in the world of finance and IT specifically, if we're excited, right, to jump on this bandwagon, but we also, because we're bogged down, we're busy, we're trying to keep up, right? What are some small but mighty, some scalable steps or action points that you are seeing industry leaders take right now?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. I mean, we're obviously still in the nascent stage of Gen AI. I mean, it's only in the last, if you want to really extend it out, the last year where it's become, more in the forefront, and maybe even the last, 6 to 7, 8, 9 months since it's been really a hot topic. So, from my experience, finance organization, I think naturally, and they should be, maybe a little more conservative in terms of jumping into new technology. And I think that's rightly so, where we should play our parts as finance leaders. But they're also thinking critically, right? So you're thinking long-term, you're thinking, okay, how can I become, as we talked about before, how can I become more efficient? I need to drive, operating margin within my business. I need to drive free cash flow within my business. I need to help drive revenue growth. And the way I do that is, trying to be, if you don't want to be on the forefront of a technology spectrum, that's fine, but you certainly don't want to be all the way in the back either. But it's trying to find the opportunities in a stepped way, in a staged way, to make sure you're capturing those efficiencies. I think the risk is that if you're not adopting the technology in a measured way, at the very least a measured way, that your competition certainly will. And you'll be left behind. And I think that's a risk, right? So as every other company out there, especially if you're a publicly traded company, or even a privately traded company for that matter, because if you have any kind of equity backers, they're going to want to see profitability from you. But as other competition is squeezing margin out of their business, so they're squeezing free cash flow out of their business, and they're getting higher growth because they're adopting new technologies. If you're missing out on that, you're going to be a laggard, and that's obviously not a position you want to be in.
Right. So you mentioned asking questions, and maybe I'm not on the far right, maybe I'm not on the far left, but I'm asking questions and I'm staying curious and getting more information, right, to continue the evolution with my peers to make sure I'm still in the same boat as everyone and I'm not perhaps missing out on something that could be unknowingly crucial to my business.
Yeah, that's right. And there's low-hanging fruit too, right? We'll bring it back to Concur that let's think about it in a very specific technological way. That and I'm a former CFO. There's probably CFOs on the call. That when I think about it, how do I want to control my P&L? Well, I want to make sure that we're talking about T&E in particular, that we have compliance in our policy, that we're not wasting money on trips, that everyone's not flying first class and staying at the Ritz-Carlton, obviously, and they're eating out and eating lobsters and steak every night for dinner. I want to make sure that the spending is within policy and that I'm getting value for that. The way I manage that is I create a massive policy with a lot of complexity in it. And I want that and I need that, but that creates friction in our system. It slows down processes. It makes your close potentially a lot slower too. If we look at terms of trying to create that compliance, to mitigate risk in our business, try to manage expenses, again, generative AI in terms of an audit solution can help to do that. We talked about it earlier, Hanna, in terms of the exception reporting. That's the potential that we have there. Get exception reporting, still manage as much complexity or as many line items you want to have in your audit solution, as much as you need in terms of creating compliance, like I said, in the organization, your T&E policy, but do it in a more automated way. And I think that is the interesting opportunity as we're evolving in that. You still have the same insight, still have the same control, but it's done in a much cleaner, more automated way.
Right. You mentioned measuring efficiencies, and it'll be crucial, right, for our ability to measure where those efficiency gains are and productivity gains are. Coming from, I spent the past 4 years as a subject matter expert in data. What is your opinion, Brian, on the word data and how we use it, right, with artificial intelligence, as well as benchmarking, KPIs, and the importance of data now more than ever?
Yeah, so when we talked about generative AI at the beginning, well, what does AI mean? You said it's all about data, it's all about patterns in data. So the whole topic comes down to data. And then we talked about before that it's having enough data and the right data and interpreting the data in the right way. So it's critical. Data is what it all comes down to, right? So the evolution is from, we're still looking at the same information, but it's the language is maybe changing slightly. We were talking about big data before, now we're talking about generative AI, but at the end of the day, it's all the same foundational principle. It's just like, how are we looking at the data? How are we elevating the data? How are we interpreting the data? Do we have enough and do we have control of it, right? We talked about before in terms of security and compliance around your data. So, as a former still data guru, that's what it comes down to. That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
I think, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're fine. I completely agree. And the way you're explaining this approach, right? It's first having enough information, and then what are you doing with it? And I think that first piece is often the most crucial. Do you have centralized visibility, whether you're a global organization or maybe you're just located in a certain portion of the world? Do you have complete visibility to adequately measure how efficiently and how effectively are our processes in each region. Because the fact is, right, we might run a little differently in different parts of the world, and that's completely okay. But do we have visibility into that? And I think it's really a scalable approach based off the conversations I've seen with my clients of that is first and foremost key. Do we have centralized visibility? And secondly, okay, what are we doing with it? How do we formulate it and manipulate it into something insightful that we can create a benchmark on and work against it?
Yeah. Right. And I mean, you're spot on. I think that SAP obviously is a huge global organization. And, going back to my old role in finance, I think that was 90% of the problem is that, SAP, so we have very advanced technological solutions, but still there's having that global insight when you're running a global business is sometimes really tough. But it's also it's critical, right? I mean, especially, I don't know how many people on the call are from, large organizations, or large multinational organizations, but how do you ensure consistency across your organization? How do you ensure compliance across the organization? I can speak to it from our company, where we do business in 160 plus countries. I think just for Concur, not to mention SAP probably does far more than that. There's a ton of complexity in that, right? Because of the local regulations. There's tax issues. There could be works council and employment issues in different countries as well. You have to maintain insight and understanding of that, and no individual can do that. So how do you consolidate that and make intelligent decisions as an organization? It's all within the data, and to the extent that you can have, Gen AI help with some of those compliance and local regulatory issues, that helps the business tremendously. And it's all about consistency, insight, and understanding what's happening in your business and it doesn't have to be a multinational organization. There's a ton of complexity doing business in one country, especially if you're a small organization doing business in one country and you can have local regulations in different regions of the country you're working in. That's incredibly complicated too. And you want to maintain that level of insight that I think we all do, but it just comes, like I said before, you scale it in one of two ways, through people or technology. People's expensive technology could be a cheaper option to do it.
Right. That's a really great point about like the bigger picture of global organizations and how we could perhaps leverage AI, right? AI learns in different languages. So it's something that can be supported on a global level and absolutely utilized for the broader picture and the broader organization. I want to switch gears here for a second. We talked a little bit about having competitive advantages, right? And we're all striving to be the best in the industry and the best in class. And I want to pick on specifically our SAP clients in particular. Brian, in your opinion, what kind of competitive advantages or upper hands do you think that our SAP clients could gain specifically with SAP Concur's integration and solutions?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think the uniqueness, there's a few that come to mind. I think first and foremost is that Concur being part of SAP, we have that natural advantage of having a native integration with SAP's ERP system. So I think if you're an SAP customer, you're likely an SAP either ECC or S4 customer. That's the most likely path I'd assume that you're on for if you're an SAP customer. And the great thing is that there is that native integration from Concur into those solutions. So it's a seamless integration, and I think that again that's kind of table stakes. I think if you come to the table and wanting to buy a T&E solution from SAP and there's not a native integration, that's problematic. But we offer that, and that's a beautiful thing. I think the bigger thing that we can offer is that we were just talking about the complexity in global organizations. SAP, and by extension of that, Concur does business across the globe. I was talking about, I think it's around 160 countries that we do business in, which means that, just like SAP can support you in all the countries you do business in, so can SAP Concur. So if you have employees in certain countries, you have them traveling to certain countries. I think the unique thing that we have to offer that a lot of smaller competitors can't is that we have that global reach. because of our extension to SAP, but also because of SAP Concur in and of itself. But there's that connectivity. I think there's another advantage. The third one is we're talking about generative AI. I think that, some of you have heard of the SAP's investment in Joule, so the new technology in terms of their version of AI. So that's basically, we have the advantage of being able to infuse that, the research development that SAP is broadly doing in their technology stack. We can take that and start to infuse that into our technologies too, and take advantage of that, not have to, develop it or license it elsewhere. Again, talking about data security that we talked about before, since we can leverage technology in-house in terms of Joule, that creates a unique situation that we don't have to go out to external parties to leverage their models, potentially as we move forward in the future. And then you think about it just outside of Joule, but just broadly speaking in terms of investment in the portfolio. SAP is a big company. We want to create this best of suite across all of our solutions, inclusive of Concur. So there is that investment that will continue to happen across our portfolio stack as a result of that. So those are all the advantages of us being part of this ecosystem. And then you think about the connectivity that can happen across other solutions too, with SuccessFactors and Ariba in terms of procurement solution, and Fieldglass in terms of external workforce solution. There's a lot of potentiality to have these integrations across an entire suite of solutions that I don't think there's many other out there that can do that exactly the same.
I completely agree. You brought up the word connectivity a couple different times, and I'm going to make a call out to our IT folks out there. What do you think is the importance of connectivity specifically with IT, right? Who's going to be starting this up, where they're going to be implementing, they're going to be managing these, and the importance of efficiency with this connectivity?
Well, I think I'm not an IT person, so the IT people will probably catch me and tell me I'm saying the wrong thing. But I think the opportunity is here is you create a couple things. It's the data integration obviously is incredible. We go back to data again. The data integration, the data flow between two systems without having to create flat files or otherwise. There's that native integration, data flows seamlessly between solutions allows, I think the IT environment to have a more efficient operating model, but also thinking about the back office too, that there's more efficient model there as well. User experience is better too. If you have a consistent look and feel in terms of how you're using solutions across a portfolio of solutions, I think that's better too, because it becomes more intuitive as an end user. So I think the data flow, the end user experience, that integration, and you think about it from a finance perspective too, like if your TV solution with expenses or spend management, whatever it is, doesn't integrate and automatically flow into your ERP system, how do you manage a close? That's practically impossible. And I think that the advantage that we have with that native integration with SAP is we have that connectivity to our solution with that data flow.
Right. I think that's a great point. And also to add on top of that, I think time is a really big concern as well, of how much time is IT taking, right, to create these connections, the connectivity, right? How much time are we taking to create custom integrations that don't naturally work, but we're gonna figure out another avenue to get the information that we need, and that's simply something, right, we don't have to do necessarily with SAP and SAP Concur. So I think about the time as well of managing these connections as well over time as they continue to change and evolve, and so forth.
Yeah, no, that's a great call. Yeah, I missed the time component, which is a huge part of the whole efficiency equation. So that's a good call out.
Yeah, definitely. So last but not least, I wanted to ask you, what are some takeaways, and where can we as IT finance focus on today? What are some small wins that we would feel comfortable integrating, right? Let's say artificial intelligence into business processes today.
Yeah, so I mean, first and foremost, I again, coming from a CFO finance role, I think it's, before we get into what can we implement or what can we take advantage of from Gen AI, I think it's critically important that IT and finance have more of a fluid conversation, because I think that to the extent your IT leaders and your finance leaders aren't on the same page, that can create a level of complexity. We just talked about how I think it's intuitive, but how technology, whether it's Gen AI or just general purchase of technology, can create efficiencies in an organization. I think that's what finance is striving to, and IT wants to as well. And I think to the extent that they're communicating on the same page and understanding, trying to understand collectively, what are they trying to solve for in both of those organizations is critically important. Because I think that, I mean, honestly, IT and finance sit in positions that they can drive the most efficiencies that I can see out of an organization than any other functions, really. And if they work collectively, you really want to manage, you think about it from a CFO perspective, you really want to manage your margin, you really want to be more productive. Your best friend in the organization should be your IT leader, because they're in the best position really to drive that. So I think creating that connectivity is really, really critical. So what can you implement? I'm not to get too much on the Concur picture, but this is a Concur call. But I think that what you can do is you can think about what are the low-hanging fruit in terms of what I can implement and get a quick ROI. And again, Concur is a low-hanging fruit, especially if you're already an SAP customer. It's a low-hanging fruit in terms of it's a quick implementation cycle typically. There's a quick ROI in terms of everything we talked about in terms of the auditing landscape, the expense landscape, and some of the evolution that we've done. And just broadly speaking, we're thinking about a T&E solution, maybe not specifically Concur, but what is the area that has a lot of let's say critical review on it, especially nowadays, is your travel and expense funds. I think we're always trying to, finance organization is always looking at T&E and how can we squeeze more out of it? Well, you need to have insight into that. And I think that's a critical component. So, and then extending it beyond that. So we want to talk beyond a T&E solution. How can I make my close better? How can make my close quicker? What is the technology you can do that? Because I think that everyone's in a competition to try to shorten the close, get your financials out quicker, put less burden on your employee in terms of a monthly close or a quarterly close, depending on how you run your business. T&E is part of that, obviously, not to bring it back to Concur yet again, but I think those are the areas that are the lowest hanging fruits. I don't know how, Hannah, I don't know what you think. I'd be curious of your opinion.
Yeah, I think you mentioned like kind of the stepping stones of before we move towards, integrating artificial intelligence or taking on anything, we first have to talk IT and finance. We have to be aligned. We have to talk about, okay, what are we doing today? How are we making those stepping stones for our future? And how do we come together on that and making sure that I'm seeing through, Brian, your eyes and what you're managing every single day? And maybe I sit in IT and I have to discuss with you, what does this look like to implement? What does this look like from an employee user experience? And how are we both staying on that same page? Because we all have the same goals at the end of the day, right? We're all moving towards the same future and the same goals. But I think that's a great point you make of we need to first step back and we need to ensure that we are truly aligned. And then secondly, we can move towards a more strategic approach together of what does this actually look like, and so forth. So I completely agree. I think that first step is always the most crucial.
Yeah, talk collectively about what your various use cases are and what your biggest headaches are across the organization. Because I think, like I said, IT and finance, I think from my experience, they both want the same thing. It's just a question of keeping the communication channels open.
Yep, exactly. All right, so I think before we go to our Q&A here, I think we're gonna have a poll question, but first and foremost, Brian, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insight and your time with us. All right, no problem. For those on the phone.
I was gonna say, I apologize, Chris Juno couldn't be here, but I'm sure he'll be on the next one.
Oh, no worries, we're lucky to have you, thank you. So for those on the phone who listened in today, if you heard anything on today's conversation or during this discussion that maybe flipped a light bulb and you want to hear some additional content, you want access to resources, or you simply want to talk with us about today's conversation, please fill out the poll and we will follow up. So I will give everyone a couple minutes to fill that out, and then we can move over to Q&A.
Okay.
Looks like people are still answering, so I'm going to give everyone a couple more minutes, a couple more seconds. All right. Well, thank you everyone for your response. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Karina to go over your guys' Q&A questions.
Thank you. Okay, so it looks like we had a few questions submitted, and we have time for a few of them here. The first one that I see, it says, my organization is currently running T&E through a free tool. If I were to consider SAP Concur, I need to know what kind of resources are available for me to easily measure cost savings, efficiency gains, and areas of overspending.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good question. I think that as we're thinking about cost savings in terms of implementing Concur, I think that there's going to be an evolution in terms of, the ROI. And when I think about it, it will evolve in terms of the efficiencies that are plugged into the solution from generative AI technology over time. The specific tools, I would defer to the Hanna and so forth to give us the specific tools that may be available for customers to calculate that. But certainly we highlighted some of the more qualitative aspect of that, where we can get some savings in our solutions, and it comes from the scaling of your organization. You think about it from an audit technology standpoint. I mentioned that there's an efficiency standpoint too, from how do we implement a T&E policy? How do we manage a T&E policy? How do we track and manage our expense that flows through that? And I think that the key thing, just to highlight one area of efficiency that can be gained, is that, and we talked about it a little bit, is, if I have non-compliance from a T&E policy standpoint, if I have that employee who's going to fly first class and stay at the Ritz-Carlton every night, what are the cost savings I can get by actually being able to track and implement my solution? I think a free solution is interesting if you are trying something, but if you actually want to have something at scale that produces the results that you need from a solution, maybe to some extent a free solution is you get what you pay for. Maybe that's the best way I can describe it. But there's also, just the breadth of our solution also, when we think about it in terms of the multinational support structure we can offer, the complexity in terms of, tax and compliance that we offer. Those are things that a free solution can't necessarily, most likely does not do in the case of T&E. And Hanna, I don't know if you have any other comments or offerings for that question.
Yeah. Knowing my background, you're probably going to know what my answer to this, but it's data. It's data first and foremost. And obviously with SAP Concur, we have the ability for you to take on your entire organization, small, large, global, what it may, right, into a centralized, reliable, responsible way. And we have the ability to parse that out by each region and clearly, right, calculate, right, where's our baseline today? Everyone just went live, and where do we want to be in the next 6 months? And we can parse that out by cost center, by department, by region, by specific individuals. So for me, it's always going to be the data at the end of the day, and SAP Concur truly is, in my opinion, the industry leader because we are the only one that can provide that.
Excellent. The next question that came in says, my company is reevaluating its corporate policy and system of controls. How does Concur use AI to stop fraud in its tracks?
Yeah, that's interesting. How do we use AI? So that would be an evolving story, though. So I don't want to talk too much about future functionality, but so let's speak in general terms, or maybe what we do today. AI, so let's talk verify, for instance. Let's think about that in terms of a solution we have that there is AI that's already embedded in it. How do we prevent fraud? So again, under the same idea that AI is looking for patterns, that's where the Concur solution is unique, and will continue to evolve, obviously, as Gen AI becomes more embedded in our solution base. But looking for anomalies and patterns in terms of how expenses are being submitted for reimbursement, and identifying where there could be non-compliance. I think that's in a nutshell what we're trying to do in terms of some of our audit technology, and flagging things that are anomalies to make sure that those can be reviewed by you or auditors or so forth to make sure that they are legitimate. So again, looking for patterns for things that are non-compliant, that could potentially be non-compliant, flagging those so we can have a review of those and make sure that they're legitimate expenses in general is what we would say from an audit technology standpoint is what we're attempting to do. Hanna, any additional comments there?
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think another key advantage to that question is obviously SAP Concur. We support small companies, large organizations, global organizations of quite literally every single industry. And so not only right day one, if you were to instill artificial intelligence with SAP Concur, it's going to have that algorithm of a large plethora, 50,000 clients, right? It's been learning over the years. But not only, it's going to learn your spending habits. It's going to learn your employee spending habits to bring first and foremost to the top. So it's not only a large data set, like we mentioned before, to catch fraud, right? Risky spend behavior, non-optimal spending behavior in its tracks, but it's also going to learn. It's going to learn to your specific employees, which I think is also pretty cool, and those trends.
Okay, the next question we have here says, I used SAP Concur in my prior life and see the value in it. How do I open that conversation to my fellow C-suite executives?
Interesting. How do you introduce it? So I think it's a lot of what we talked about, right? So it's about, we talked about compliance, so I won't talk about that again. It's the user experience. I think that's incredibly important, that we kind of minimize the friction that happens in an organization through a solution that has a great user experience. But if you're an SAP customer, it's everything we talked about in terms of the integration of Concur into the broader SAP ecosystem, that you have that data integrity, that data flow, that data integration. I think that's part of the value proposition that we offer. And I think that one of the key things also is, if you're a multinational organization, to mention this again, is that we operate in so many different countries. So if you are a multinational organization, we can provide you with that seamless user experience across your employee base in multiple countries, provide the analytics and visibility of your team you spend across your entire organization, which I think is unique. And we have that uniqueness understanding the regulatory and tax information too in local countries also. So I think that, and we talked about some of the ROI components too that Hanna just mentioned, that I think that would be an interesting way to introduce the topic. So Hanna, I don't know if you have any other comments on that. I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, I really do feel like we've kind of hit it all, and I think it really just depends on who you're talking to. We talked about integrations, and we talked about employee experience and the user impact of managing and implementing, right, the software, and obviously that's going to be more directed towards IT. We talked about compliance and efficiency and getting rid of those mundane tasks, and that's what you're going to talk with the finance. So I think it really first and foremost depends who are you talking to. What do they care about? And right, using the topics and the proof points that we hit on today to bring that business case higher up into light. And I think having the ability to say, I was a user, I did this, I ran it, I managed it, and I see its value, I think will be really impactful as well, along with the proof points we talked about today.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's a good point. It's just who are you talking to? What are their concerns? That's a great point. I'm thinking from a CFO perspective, what could you give me, right? From an ROI perspective, I think you can use to Concur before you can demonstrate those proof points.
Yep, multiple considerations for sure.
All right, well, it does look like that's all the time we have for questions. If you submitted a question and we did not get to answer it during our time today, don't worry. Someone from our team will follow up with you. Once again, Hanna, Brian, thank you both so much for joining us today and lending your insights. As a reminder to our audience, please complete the survey that pops up as you exit the webinar. Thank you everyone for joining and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right.